Welcome to the Fourth Stream Podcast, where we are dedicated to finding hope. You can count on us to do our research and invite you into a dynamic learning process of authenticity. You can find lots of hopeful resources at fourthstream.com.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about our story. We've been talking about the meta story, the big story, but what does that have to do with our personal story? This photograph right here, well actually it's a photograph of a painting. I have a kind of an art background. I'm not an artist, but I did take fine arts in school and messed around with painting, so I do it for fun now. And this is a painting that I don't know. I was thinking one day, I was looking at my paints and I was thinking about life, and the little boat is kind of how I feel philosophically about life sometimes. And then just the whole panorama there of the background, the backdrop that you're looking at here is, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis's character Aslan, where it talks about further up and further in. So it's the whole idea of the journey and the journey that we're experiencing as we go through life. And as that happens, the whole idea of my story mattering has been a really huge help to me as I've encountered the intersection of science and of philosophy and faith in my own life. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, about the fact that our story does matter. Dig down into that a little bit. I'll be referring to a book, this book, Curious Journey, which I wrote a number of years ago. And basically what I tried to do is I tried to pick out different aspects of things that I've learned from my story. So I encourage you, while we go through this process today, or however long it takes, to think about that for yourself, your own curious journey. I call it a curious journey because it's all so different. Each of our journeys are the same. They start at the same place, they end at the same place, but they're all just so varied from one another. And so you and I, hopefully, as we have this conversation, we can think about different aspects of that. First, I'm going to do a few readings out of these, very short. So I'm not going to go on and on and on, but I picked out a few things that set this idea up. And this one is on story. It's in the introduction of my book, Curious Journey. Little captures our imagination more than a good story. What about a great movie draws you in and inspires your replay button hours and even days after you have returned to your own everyday? The classics endure because they're able to cross-culturally ignite minds over multiple generations. A real modern tragedy exists in that we reject our own stories as average or too ordinary to matter to anybody else. We are robbed of our sense of wonder at an early age and slip into a tepid mediocrity created by special effects, highly paid actors and actresses, and million-dollar ambient budgets. We believe we have nothing to offer because we've come to believe that story must be dramatic and big in order to matter. But nothing could be further from the truth. Each of our stories is the real story, and the special mark upon each one of our lives is of huge human value. Our story is one that unfolds with uniqueness, beauty, meaning, whether we believe it or not. It's time to become storytellers once again. It's time to listen, laugh, cry, and experience one another as we impart our uniqueness within the isolating world around us. So in our journey here, if you've been kind of keeping track, this is a series of podcasts. Who knows how I'll organize them when I finally lay them out there, although you can find them, obviously, Apple Podcasts right now. But we've considered turbulence and imperfection as square one for our worldview, for our lives, and how we seem to be born into a world at war and we experience turbulence. Second of all, we weighed issues regarding our search for authenticity. What makes life authentic? What makes truth authentic? What makes us as people authentic? And you can just carry that out into culture and all the different things that we experience as human beings. We also discussed the woven nature of the God story, because it's really important as we look at our own stories to see if there is a backdrop, if there is a meta story. And right along with that, we explored the question, why this story, and the nature and the impact of this story. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you're just picking up now, and you might want to go back and look at those, they're all about, I don't know, half hour long. And it's kind of woven into a thought process, even though these are independent conversations. Last time we were together, we talked about the intersect between science and philosophy and faith in defining our worldview, and how the uniqueness of each of those, when they're applied honestly, can bring so much benefit to the human soul. And then today we're considering, then with that, like I just read out of Curious Journey, the impact of our personal story and what that means. So why I'm using Curious Journey and some of these stories is I took a look at my life and I thought, well, what were some of the defining things that not only that just happened to me, but what did I experience while they were happening to me? And that's what's so cool. I mean, if you and I could sit down and talk right now, and if you could tell me about your story, we would have some similarities, but it would be totally different and totally unique. That's what's so cool about the complexity and the immensity of the God that we serve. And so what I want to talk about today was some of the things that I've learned from my story, and hopefully that will stimulate you as you think about things that you have learned from your story. When our kids were little, we found a plaque, and we had it in the house for a long time. It's down at our cabin now. And it says, "Home is where our story begins." And there are several observations that I have about that. I mean, everybody's story begins somewhere, it ends somewhere, right? It's the nature of story. Well, the first thing is that we have no choice over where our story unfolds. You know, our culture, our gender, economics, health, our appearance. Just think about all the things that we have no control over whatsoever. And that could be like really good or really bad, or it can be both. It just depends upon your story. Some people have brutal stories. I don't really have a brutal story. I kind of come on the other end of the spectrum, but the bottom line is that all of us have needs that we share in common with each other. And so for better or for worse, our story is shaped by our roots. And when I say that our story is shaped by our roots, that doesn't mean it's necessarily defined by our roots, but it is shaped. And I draw a huge distinction there, having spent many, many years talking to many people and couples about just that whole picture of why things are the way that they are in their particular life. So a few of the topics we just read from Story there, and just kind of the setup of Story. And the next one that I'd like to talk about just briefly is, it's one paragraph, and it's about the whole idea of imperfection. So this kind of relates back to that conversation about the turbulence of imperfection. And I was thinking about this years ago before I just wrote that recent book that I did. You and I could recount many stories of imperfection. The times we've let others down or hurt them, either intentionally or unintentionally. When we've been discounted or hurt or swindled and even attacked. There are basically three directions we can go with hurt. We can become embittered. We can also construct a labyrinth of denial, or we can wrestle with the absolute monster of forgiveness and come out the other end of the battle at peace. Peace in the knowledge that justice belongs to God, and getting even is a trap, and that imperfection is not unique to my life alone. It is a sad part of the fallen world in which we live. And when it comes to imperfection and us dealing with our imperfection, and maybe you've lived a charmed life. And like I said, I'm kind of on the continuum where I didn't have a lot of turbulence, but 90% of the world hasn't experienced that. There are lots of things going on right now that are beyond any turbulence I can even imagine. If I wasn't connected with some organizations around the world that are trying to help people, I probably would be unaware. So part of what has emerged in my story is my own imperfection, but also a recognition of where that fits in to the imperfection that's all around me. And That kind of leads to another thing that I had to start thinking through, is the idea of solitude, because as I tried to figure out why things were the way that they were, I had to ask myself questions, and I had to get quiet to answer those questions. And so this comes out of a chapter, and these are brief chapters. They're really more like essays. So, you're not looking at a scholarly work here. You're just basically looking at somebody telling their story, but hopefully in a way that might be helpful to you. This is from the chapter on solitude. People make the world go round. There's little doubt about it. However, solitude makes me good for others. Sameness ensures I will trivialize the value of my human network of relationships. To not speak or hear another human voice for a few hours can expose hidden parts of my soul. And cutting through the clutter of the noise of the high-tech rich human experience can amplify reflection. To listen to a distant thunderstorm build and arrive, for instance, and then rumble into the distance as it passes can add urgency to my willingness to experience deeper personal engagement. So you kind of get the picture here. I'm looking at different aspects of things that I've not just learned, but things that I've experienced, and they've formulated into my particular philosophy of life, which is kind of what the whole series here is about, different aspects about that. I'd also like to indulge, if you'd indulge me for a minute. There's an interesting concept. It's a woven thread through the Bible, and it's called giving shelter. And there's a lot of things you could say about that, but this was helpful to me. And so this is from page 51 of Curious Journey in the chapter or the essay on shelter. A number of years ago, we helped start a ranch for at-risk kids. Each week of the summer, we would pick up about 75 campers in the city. We'd spend 5 days together with our special team of counselors, and then we would deposit the kids back to the care of their parent or guardian. In that first year, I had a lot of contact with the children, and there was a little 8-year-old who spent all of his time collecting treasure. A neat rock, a discarded fishing lure, a shiny something dug out of the dirt. And as he collected, Jimmy put his treasures into a safe place. For a lot of these kids, just being safe was a huge deal. Jimmy had very few clothes and a small bag of possessions he had brought with him to the ranch. And I happened to sit next to Jimmy on the school bus as we made the 1-hour trek back to town. As things quieted down, he began to lay his treasures onto his lap, along with his art project that he was bringing home. I reached over and I patted his head like I would have done with one of my own boys. And he leaned in toward my touch. And slowly he looked down on the treasures in his lap, and he carefully selected a shiny piece of metal. He looked up and he held it out for me to take. This little boy was telling me that he noticed that he was being sheltered. And in his own language, he gave me one of the most meaningful gifts that I've ever received in my life. This is the way I see it. The gift of life was planted in me not by blood nor by the choice of man, but by God. I'm given a certain number of days for the stewardship of my life. Men and women of peace, like it talks about in Luke 10, are those who design and live their lives to provide shelter so that the birds of the air may nest in safety. This is my aspiration, to provide shelter for others. So these essays for me, and you have your own essays because they're your thought processes. Maybe you don't write them down, but maybe you tell these stories, or maybe at night when you're going to sleep, a guy like Jimmy, little Jimmy comes to mind, who's by now a grown man, and who knows? I mean, the last thing I did when he walked off the bus, I said, God, please shelter that little boy, which is a prayer I've used over and over again during my experiences. And in that context, I asked a question, because of the imperfection of life, here's the question. How do we escape our demons? And yeah, maybe you think that's a harsh word, but these are the things that chase us around. Call them what you want. I call them our personal demons. For instance, healing brokenness. If we are broken in different ways, which many of us are, how do we escape that brokenness? Some people carry brokenness with them till the day that they die. For some people, it wrecks their lives. For some people, it is a part of their deliverance. For some people, it's part of their instruction. Also, there's the idea of soothing deep disappointment. Think about inside of your heart right now. What is it that that's disappointed you? Maybe you've got that situation you think of back in school, or maybe it's something that happened between you and a friend. But when you have those deep disappointments and there's no way of reversing the impact of them, what do? And so that whole idea of soothing deep disappointment, what's my approach to experiencing that? The third thing that comes to mind about escaping our demons is overcoming personal shortcomings and failures. Think about the things that go on in personal conversations that we have with ourselves. And they start when you're very young, and I still have them today. Sometimes I almost feel schizophrenic. I feel like I've got this voice going on inside of me, or voices, and the voice that is coming out of my mouth, and I watch those things and I look at my personal shortcomings and failures, and I'm always casting the next situation based upon that backdrop. And a lot of them I've overcome, but some of them, you kind of carry with you all the way through your life. And finally, when it comes to escaping our demons, how do we manage our fears and our insecurities? I think for a lot of people, this is a matter of pretending like we don't have them. But you know as well as I do that fear lurks on the edges. And even if you're an older person listening to me right now, you know that there are fears that follow us through life, and they result in insecurity. So all of those things in this context of story, these are the things that emerge in our personal stories. And some things we have control over, some things we don't have control over. Maybe it's how we respond to something, but a lot of things, particularly when we begin growing up in those first 10 or 12 years, what do? We're just reacting to the things and responding to the things that are happening around us. We had a conversation, a more in-depth conversation about authenticity, and I just want to read a paragraph here out of this chapter on page 23, or this essay on page 23, because authenticity really fits in this conversation about story, because I feel like I'm looking for authenticity in people and in principles and in experiences as I go through life. Very brief. This is my basic hope for writing Curious Journey. The gospel, or the kingdom gospel, is incarnational. That means it happens inside of life. It's personal. It's alive. It's all about Jesus invading our personal stories and drawing them into line with the big, never-ending story, like we've talked about with the God story. Because we are active me consumers and often isolated relationally, we like to think that we are living big. Now, this is really important, but we are actually upside down. We think that by finding ourselves, we are winning. We may be occupied, but we are increasingly isolated. When and how do we know when we are truly alive? And I think that's a big part of living an authentic life. Now, I'm trying to take that bigger principle that we talked about authenticity, and I'm trying to bring it right down into my personal everyday experience that I'm having. So, story is where we have our launch meaning. A couple things come to mind related to this. First of all, circumstances. We've talked about that. Maybe you grew up with a special needs sibling, or maybe you were poor, or maybe you were rich, or whatever. There are circumstances that are a part of our launch. Second of all, experiences. Some of them are chosen, some of them are not chosen. You've got the emotional aspect of life, gentle and severe. Some of the kinder, gentler emotions, and some of the ones that you'll never forget probably for the rest of your life. We also have launch meaning in our values, and some of those are imputed to us and adapted, and some of them we choose, and some of them develop into our own convictions. All of these are part of our launch meaning. We have personal vision, good and evil. Where can I make a difference? What kind of person am I choosing to be? And then finally, the ability to hope and dream is a part of our launch meaning, because if you come from a family of dreamers, that can help you with your resolve and your imagination, strength and courage. And if you're not dreamers, it just looks a different way. One's not better than the other. They just look different when it comes to our launch meaning. In all of this, the idea of forgiveness has been a huge tool to me. I'm putting up a picture here of Jesus. And these are the religious leaders that are kind of in the background, and you've got the woman who is caught in adultery. I'm not sure that she had this many clothes on. This artist from history, antiquity, might be being kind here. Bottom line is that Jesus is writing in the dirt. And as he writes in the dirt, we don't know what he writes, but apparently these guys can see it, or something's going on in their consciences, and they file out one by one, the oldest to the youngest. What's the deal with that? And he looks at the woman and he says, "Where are your accusers?" after they all leave. Because he said, "He who is without sin, let him cast the first stone." And she said, "Nowhere, no one, Lord." And he said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." If you're looking for a way of summarizing who Jesus was, this is it. And I'd like to read this from page 93 from Curious Journey. "Above all, dear friends, remember God is incredibly gracious, and those of us who realize we have been forgiven much are going to love much. Our human problem is not solved by a change of environment or even the best self-reformation, and certainly not by mere human governance. Freedom grows as we understand who God is and how his heart and his mind work. A grateful person in touch with his or her shortcomings and who knows deeply the forgiveness of God will find a capacity to love and to be loved, which is truly supernatural." There are markers in our stories which reveal our defining process. Disappointments shape us, our fears, our frustrations, our perceptions. Our memories fuel us. Over in my office, next to my office, I got a picture that we bought after our son had open heart surgery when he was very young, and there was an artist that had paintings up all around the hospital, and we bought one, and it's a family of laughing lions, and it just struck us, and I'll probably have it with me till the day that I die, because it's a memory that fuels me about God's deliverance and about God's kindness. There are also markers that relate to encouragements that overcome belittling, and it's like kind words and personal interest and reinforcement. Think about the times that people have come up to you and said something good and something positive and something helpful to your soul. And another marker is troubles and tragedies and hurts that weigh on us. And all of those things are a part of each one of our own curious journeys woven into your story. And like I said, I think at the beginning of this, there's nobody like you. There's only one you, only one story. In my hunting gear, I keep an old brass compass that my grandfather carried long before I was born. In northern Wisconsin, we hunt large sections of land used for paper pulp production, and there's mile after mile of sameness. Without taking frequent compass readings, you can literally get turned around, especially if the sun is obscured by clouds. With 100 steps, you can make a turn that will cost you hours to find your way back to a main road. You can walk in circles despite your intention to find a straight path. This is why men and women need a spiritual compass. When we have connected with God with a pure, motivated heart that wishes to encounter Him and hear His voice, the want to is resolved in our compass. Just a couple things in conclusion about story within an authentic faith view. First of all, you matter. There has been, or ever will be only one of you. You can count on that being true. Your story matters. And our connection to the story is something greater than we have a tendency to give credit for. Also, your story is significant to God. Your story is woven into this bigger story that we've been talking about. And asking the question, what is God's scope? How massive is He? How able is He in the area of story? Can He really keep track of every story of every human who has ever lived? And my answer to that question has to be yes, or He's not God, right? And finally, how do we escape our demons? Like we were just talking about within our authentic faith approach to life. If you enter Curious Journey in the search at fourthstream.com, you will find an audio post for each of the 26 story essays from my book, Curious Journey. A little bit of help. It can serve as a tool for your own meditation or for your conversation with others. I'd like to close with this passage about worth, about human value, which is what we're talking about here in the story. Jesus said this in Luke chapter 12, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 cents? Yet not one of them is forgotten before God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't fear, you are more valuable than many sparrows." That just really connects with my heart. It connects with who I think God is, the big story, why my story is significant. And that's why I can go into my life every day and go, this isn't about being famous. This isn't about being noticed by other people. If you get all that, great. Does it really get you anywhere? How many people are still alive who knew Abraham Lincoln face to face? No one. But the reality is that we have been so blessed to be included in the story of God. And that's what Curious Journey was a conversation about, or is a conversation about. You matter. Your story matters. God sees you. And significance flows from who we are, not merely what we do. Take care, my friend. I hope that was helpful to you. We've got some more great things to talk about as we try to get windows, doors of insight into this great understanding of what's going on around us and where we fit in the process.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. You can find posts and podcasts on tons of subjects at fourthstream.com, along with encouraging music which can be shared by a variety of ages. Finding hope at fourthstream.com.